Hello, I'm Guy Mackenzie, and this is another McMullen video production, and I'm here in Newton Abbot, Devon, with recording engineer and equipment designer Malcolm Toft.
Hello Guy,
good to meet you, Malcolm.
And you?
Malcolm, how did your career start?
Well, it started with a love of the guitar, I have to say. You know, when I was about 11, I went to see a film called The Girl Can't Help It and saw these wonderful guitars with single-sided machine heads and flat, solid bodies that I'd never seen before, and sort of thought they were the most amazing thing. And I suppose, first of all, I fell in love with the guitar as a shape, and then, of course, the sound. You had people like Duane, Eddy, and, of course, the shadows in Cliff Richard. I loved that reverb and that sound. And then seeing Buddy Holly with the iconic Fender Stratocaster, that just about did it for me. So I started playing guitar poorly, shall we say, at an early age, but that's what got me into the whole thing. Played in a band when I was about 14, a school band, and we became sort of reasonably serious on the local circuit in Kingston upon Thames. Right. And when I was about 14 or 15, I suppose, we went into a local studio, R.G.Jones in Walden, near Wimbledon. Okay. And it was a seminal moment for me. You know, I'd always been interested in how records sounded so well defined, and of course the technology they had, the reverbs, the slapback echo, we didn't have access to that. So to go into a studio and to have some of those sounds recreated, to me was just another world. And I knew from then on that that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to create sound and play with sound and you know, control it, and the feeling you get of having a band and making them sound as a record, to me there's still nothing like it. You know, it sends shivers down my spine, and that's lived with me all my life, I suppose.
So in 1964 you started as a trainee, and then you moved on to CBS Studios, is that correct?
That's right. I started in a very small studio in Putney, in London. Learnt a lot, very small studio, very badly run, but learnt an awful lot. The guy who ran it, Tony Pike, was an ex-drummer, and he taught me microphone technique. He was very intense, taught me microphone technique, taught me how to get the best. It was literally mono recording, where you recorded on one machine, played it back and overdubbed onto another. There was no multi-track, but you really learnt your craft, and there was no soloing, so you actually had to tune your ears to listen to instruments, a thing you can't do these days. And after that I'd learnt enough and moved on to CBS Studios in London. And worked in their studios for a couple of years. Bit frustrated because I couldn't get into their main studios, which is where the Love Affair had recorded and bands like that, because it was a bit controlled by the engineers there. They wouldn't let anybody new in, so I was getting a little bit frustrated. And then heard about this new studio that was opening called Trident.
That was Trident, yes. And didn't you become its first engineer?
I did. Right? I went to their opening party and spoke to one of the owners, found myself in a room talking to one of the owners. He asked where I was from, what studio, and I said CBS, I'm a recording engineer. They were looking for an engineer, and a couple of days later he rang me up and said, would you come along? And I did a mix on their console, and it was the blind leading the blind, to be honest with you. It really was. They'd got no experience. I was the only one who actually had some studio experience, and they were the first studio in England, well, first studio in Europe with an 8-track recording facility. And yes, they took me on. I was their first engineer that they actually employed in, I think that was April 1968.
Oh, congratulations. And then you worked there with Tony Visconti.
Yes, again it was.
Tell me about that.
You know, I'd just joined there, as I say, in April, May, something like that. Tony had just come over from America. He'd been brought over by a producer called Denny Cordell, and Denny had sort of taken him under his wing. And Tony was very new to the game, very new to London, etc. But we hit it off as people, and I can always remember he said to me on the talkback system, what's your birth sign, Mal? And I said, it's Taurus. And he said, well, I'm Taurus, we'll work together. So that's how we formed our relationship. It really just on personalities. And I worked with Tony for over 3 years. We worked on all the early Tyrannosaurus Rex stuff with him. And Tony credits me with teaching him how to engineer. And we've been firm friends friends ever since. In fact, I'm meeting with him next week. So,
Are you really?
Yeah.
And of course, you worked on David Bowie's Space.
Yes,
Space
well,
Oddity.
Tony produced Space
Yeah.
Oddity, the album. He didn't produce the single, but he produced the album. And as Tony's engineer, I worked on the album with him. That's right.
And you engineered James Taylor's
I did.
debut.
Yes,
Is that
I did.
correct?
His
Yeah.
first
Yeah.
album with Peter Asher producing,
Right.
which was again 8-track.
Yeah.
Produced that. I mixed a little help from my friends by Joe Cocker.
Yeah. Oh, did you?
I recorded Those Were the Days by Mary Hopkins.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And Paul McCartney produced that, so I worked
Yeah.
with Paul on that. Paul
Yeah.
was marvellous to work with, you know.
Okay.
They were wonderful times. I mean, we would literally have Marc Bolan in one studio, David Bowie in another, or you'd have David Bowie in one studio and Elton John in another, because we did all of Elton John's early recordings.
Yeah.
I mean, it was an amazing place to be and an amazing time, you know.
And also, you worked on the Beatles' Hey Jude.
That's right.
Tell me about that.
Well, the Beatles, again, Abbey Road had missed a trick. They didn't have 8-track recording. So we had 8-track.
Yeah.
And the Beatles were fed up. They'd just done Sgt. Pepper and were fed up trying to run 2 4-track recorders.
Right.
So they came to Trident. And the thing about Trident was we had a really great atmosphere. Abbey Road was a bit standoffish. They wore white coats and, you know, there's quite a them and us sort of thing.
Yeah.
We were a very informal studio. You know, we used to make toast at 3 o'clock in the morning and things like that, you know. And so very informal, and the Beatles loved that.
Yeah.
So they came to us not only because they'd heard the atmosphere was good, but because we had 8-track recording.
Right.
And they recorded Hey Jude. And I didn't do the recording. Barry Sheffield, one of the studio owners, did the recording. But he went away on holiday, and EMI heard the original mix and realised there was an expletive on Hey Jude.
I didn't know that.
A lot of people don't, and when I pointed out to them, they're always amazed. But about 2 minutes 59 seconds or so into it, you'll hear "Let Her Under Your Skin," and then a few seconds later you'll hear a "Whoa," and then a few seconds after that you'll hear "Fucking hell." And the story is that they were recording the vocals, and the headphone. They were late at night. They'd all been maybe smoking certain substances, and the headphone mix had got louder and louder to cope with all of this.
Yeah.
And they invited somebody in to do some vocal backing.
Yeah.
It was a band called Marmalade, one of the singers from Marmalade, came in, picked up the headphones, and they were so loud, he threw them on the floor and went, "Fucking hell,"
Right.
because they were so loud. Got picked up on that mic, and that track then got bounced in with a load of others, so it ended up on the main vocal track.
Okay.
And when Barry originally mixed it, he missed it. So they brought it back in, and I remixed it and brought the fader down at that level. So I think they ended up using that mix. So yeah, I have a claim to fame as saying
That's an interesting bit of musical history, actually. Then in 1971 you became Trident studio manager, didn't you?
I did, yes. I stopped engineering, became manager of the studios, and at that time we were looking to buy a new recording console, because our 16-track console was no longer... We were always on the forefront at Trident, always getting the new technology, and we wanted to go from 16 to 24-track. We had a small control room, and we needed 24-track facilities and certain things that we needed on it. And it was my task to go out with Barry Sheffield, the studio, one of the studio owners, to source a new console. And we went to all the major manufacturers that are around at that time. Neve, Kodak, Helios, SSL weren't around at that time. And we realised in discussion with them that none of them could provide a console that would fit the physical space, and none of them had 24-track facilities. And I had at that time been working with one of the maintenance engineers at Trident Studios. In my spare time I was building a console, because I always thought my career path would be to own my own studio. That was my ambition. And Barry Porter, who was one of the maintenance engineers, was helping me sort of do some design work on my console. So in a very rash moment, coming back in the car from visiting Neve, when we were discussing, you know, what would we do about this console, I said to Barry Sheffield, well, why don't we build our own console? You know, we can get what we want. We've got the technical expertise with Barry. I can do the systems engineering. Our engineers at the studio can give us feedback, you know, recording engineers, etc., etc. And unbelievably, they said, well, okay, why don't, you know, if you think you can do it, we'll give you a year and a room to build it. And that's how we built the very first Trident A range. It was always ever only going to be a prototype for our own studio. But what happened was, while we were building it, a lot of people came along who had been using the studio, Chipping Norton Studios, Tony Visconti, and sort of said, could you build a console for me? And that's how we came into business as Trident Audio Developments. So we didn't plan it; it just took off as a separate entity to Trident.
That's quite a story. And in 1992, you formed Malcolm Toft Associates.
That's right.
And you designed a new console, didn't you? Which was an update to that design.
Yes. Well, I'd sold Trident in 1988.
Right.
And I had an agreement that I wouldn't compete for 3 years, and it had been pretty intense up to that time, so I sort of took some time out. And then I was approached by an American client who said, look, you know, Trident aren't making the revered Trident Series 80 anymore. Have you ever thought about designing, you know, that console? And I said, well, if I did, I would make some improvements to it, because people these days needed more auxiliary sends and wider range of EQ and stuff. So I designed a console called the MTA Series 980, which is in actual fact the console we are sitting in front of today.
It's quite bewildering to me, I have to tell you that. I wouldn't even know where to start.
But that was that is the console that became effectively, it's an update of the Trident console, and in its own right was quite successful, you know. And MTA continued for quite a number of years, well up into the new millennium.
And then, of course, in 2006, you founded the Music Mill Studios,
That's
where
right,
we are
which is
now.
where we are now.
That's right.
Yeah.
And you're in partnership with South Devon College, is that correct?
Yes, we did training courses here as well with South Devon College.
But then, Malcolm, in 2012, you formed Ocean Audio.
That's right.
And designed the first Analogue console. And tell me a bit about that.
Well, it was the first analog console that was designed specifically around the new format of 500 series modules, because the music, you know, the recording industry has changed dramatically even over the last 5 or 6 years. And what's happening now is that larger studios are becoming more of an anachronism. People can record at home, they can buy, you know, very powerful software for their laptop. So people are now doing a lot more recording at home. They don't need the proliferation of equipment that they've got in a studio. But what's happened is that there's a format that was developed by a company called API many years ago that's become popular, which is a modular system where you can plug various modules in from different companies into a standard rack. So I designed this console, the Ocean Audio Arc, to support that format, and it's quite unique in what it does.
So Malcolm, you've been involved in a lot of very interesting things and innovations. What have you got in the pipeline? What have you got that's new?
Well, you know, as I said to you, the music, you know, the recording industry has changed a lot, and I've realised in the last couple of years that whilst I like designing analog consoles, the market for that is diminishing. You know, people are obviously, digital now has come on by leaps and bounds, and there are things you can do with digital consoles you can't do with analog, and analog front end is still good, but analog consoles, you know, that market is definitely diminishing. So I sat back and, you know, I'm a little bit older now, shall we say, I want to kick back, got grandchildren, and don't, you know, I still love the industry. So I basically thought, where do I want to go, what do I want to do? And an idea that I'd had for quite a few years from my old studio days was a bass preamplifier, because a guy came in to use my studio as a bass player, couldn't get the sound he wanted from his amp, and I tweaked one of my equalizers, frequencies for bass, and he absolutely loved it. So what I've done now is I've designed this new product.
I've been looking at that and wondering what it is.
This is it. This is a preamplifier designed specifically for bass players, and what it does, it takes the controls that are actually normally on your amplifier and puts them into a unit. I won't call it a pedal, it's a preamplifier that sits in front of you on the stage. So all you actually need is your bass guitar and a power amplifier or the PA system. And what we've got in this is an equalizer section. All the controls, as you see, light up, and you can bypass each range of the equalizer, and the frequencies are all tuned specifically for bass players. And it's got 2 inputs, so you can have it two separate basses, one with an input level there and another input level on the back. As I said, you can bypass the EQ, you can bypass each frequency, which means you can tune, you know, a mid-range frequency and then boost it. And that allows you to punch through. It's got a studio quality compressor built in, a single knob studio quality DBX compressor. You've got metering all the way through the system. You've got the compressor can be switched pre and post the EQ. Balanced direct outputs on the back, both straight after the preamp and after the main output. The thing will work anywhere in the world, on any mains frequency, completely self-contained. And it's been incredibly well received. We've got some great bass players who are starting to use it.
Well, I've got one or two in mind that I'd like to try it, as Lars will know. And I like the look of it, but I like the colour and I like all those lights.
Well, it's solidly built as well. This is a 6mm thick aluminium extrusion, you know, that's designed for use on the road. At the moment, we've got Dave Swift, who's Jules Holland's bass player, using it. We've got Phil Susan, who's Ozzy Osbourne's bass player, using it. I'm going to take one up to Tony Visconti next week, who's going to use it on his new tour. We've had Ida Svensson use it, who was Prince's bass player. She likes it. So, yes, we're getting a very good reaction.
Malcolm, I know one thing I haven't mentioned is you're actually a professor too.
I'm very proud to be one, yeah.
Oh, no, he's not.
Oh, yes, I am.
Oh, no, he's not.
I have the paper to prove it.
Yes, he is. It says so somewhere.
And I believe also, Guy, that you're a drummer.
Yes, I am.
No, he's not. No, he's not.
And what do you call a drummer wearing a suit?
Tell me, Malcolm.
It's the accused. And on that note,
Professor, thank you very much for talking to me.
Nice
Malcolm Toft, it's been an absolute pleasure.
And you, Guy, thank you.
And I forgive you for all the remarks you made about the drummer.